Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Amandine Flachs and you may have came across my live video stream where I interview early stage startup founders and play with video game with them. But due to the Cuban situation, I have been hosting remote interviews over the past few weeks. And today I am super excited to be joined by Cathy White, who is the founder of CEW Communication, but she's also doing an amazing job working and supporting startups in Europe. Cathy, I'm super happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's always nice to have a chat with you.
Yeah, we've known each other for years actually, and it's so nice to just keep in touch and follow what you're up to. So we are right now live on many platforms, and I would like to invite everyone to just join the discussion and ask your own questions. So I do have a bunch of questions for Cathy, actually many questions. But if you have any question regarding your own company or just want to talk about, PR startup and also communication PR and marketing for your startup, just jump into the chat and ask us anything. I see we have already a few people here. Luke, Jacob, hi, good to see you here today. So, Cathy, I do have lots of questions, as I mentioned, questions about marketing and PR for startups, but also questions regarding the pandemic situation. But first thing first, can you tell us a bit more about your own journey? I know you have an incredible experience working with startups. So can you just brief us a bit on that and also tell us more
Yeah,
about CEW?
sure. So my history of working with startup companies started about 10 years ago. So when I left university, I'd done a postgraduate in marketing, and actually marketing and PR was not what I wanted to professionally pursue. But I ended up falling into it anyway. So originally I wanted to be the female version of Quentin Tarantino and direct movies, but I've always been fascinated with storytelling and creating narratives, and then also had an obsession with the media. So I was heavily involved in running the radio station at university. I used to work for the student newspaper. So writing, telling stories, interviewing people has always been a part of my career and kind of fascination, really. But I fell into working as an intern at a PR agency in London that was the kind of satellite office of a Silicon Valley based firm. So straight off the bat, I was working with the likes of Index Ventures. I was part of the team that launched TransferWise back when TransferWise was still a 5-6 person man team. And then I was also lucky to work with a lot of kind of the other big names that kind of came from the Silicon Roundabout. So this is very much when the London tech scene was still kind of in its infancy. It had been going for a few years, but it was still very much concentrated around Old Street before it's kind of expanded everywhere, right? And, and there's amazing tech scenes all across the UK now. So I worked with Index Ventures, like I said, TransferWise. I worked with Songkick, Silicon Milk Roundabout, the Odd Jobs Fair. Was fortunate enough to also work with Moo.com, and then also Silicon Valley based startups. Well, they were much bigger scale ups that were looking at expanding across to EMEA. That 9 months into that journey, I became the acting managing director of the PR agency in London, having only been doing PR for about 9 months. It's just a switch in management and a small team, but it gave me my first taste of operation side of things, and actually the more of the kind of the way that the business functioned. So I had this experience of kind of keeping things going whilst the firm in Silicon Valley was trying to find a replacement MD in London. And then at the same time, we were very fortunate that most of the people that we worked with directly were the founders of a business. It wasn't necessarily common that they had someone in place who was a CMO or a head of marketing. So my first 1 to 2 years in my career was just surrounded by people that were building businesses, and all of that rubbed off on me. And I kind of had it set in my head that I wanted to get to a point where I built my own agency. And that kind of set the path for the rest of my career. So I went on to work at another PR agency back when it was again starting up. So I came in as employee number 2 in an agency that was set up within a much larger advertising firm. And was again very lucky to work with people like, companies such as Cedars, Klarna, Lakestar Capital, Draper Esprit. So again, a big mix of kind of startup and venture experience. And then I decided I needed to get some in-house experience and get away from agency just for a little bit to understand how it works on the other side. So I went in-house at Seed Camp. And at Seed Camp, it was great because my role was communications and marketing, but 50% of the time I was actively engaged with working with the portfolio. So I had, I could go into a room one day and have a conversation with someone from Borrow My Doggy. And then an hour later, I'm having a conversation with someone who's working at Revolut. Their portfolio was very, very, very mixed, and it presented a lot of different challenges from a lot of different companies, which is really good to make sure that the grey matter inside my head is really, really thinking and considering all of the options. Then I went to Tech City UK, now Tech Nation, did my government bit as head of communications. That was a big challenge in and of itself. So when I started, the first week on the job was London Tech Week, which for anyone who knows it knows that it's hell. It's a lot going on that week. So it was London Tech Week, and it was the week that we voted to leave the EU. Wow. So my job role changed overnight. It went from, be there to champion UK startup to suddenly being Cathy. Everything is on fire. Everyone is panicking and we need to manage this. So my job basically for multiple months was just responding to journalist inquiries from all over the world who wanted insight into how the tech scene was reacting to the problems, the challenges that Brexit would bring them. I could only do that for so long personally because I'm a Remainer. So I couldn't keep spinning positive stories. So I decided to accelerate launching my own company. So I launched CEW Communications 3 years ago. We specialize in everything that I've basically done in my career. So we specialize in working with early stage tech startups. We primarily work with B2B businesses, but then we also work with the ecosystem that supports them. And that ecosystem is very broad. So we've worked with VCs, we've worked with co-working spaces, we've worked with initiatives that are actually helping get kids into STEM, which I find personally fascinating, as Amandine will know, all of the work I've done previously with Geek Girl Meetup as well. Anything like that, I get super excited. And also kind of government-backed initiatives that are there to support particular segments of the UK tech sector now. So what's interesting for me, kind of looking back on 10 years of my career, is how much it's grown. And subsequently, we used to kind of talk about UK tech or London tech or tech city in one bracket. And now we have to talk about fintech, prop tech, insurtech, and at a much greater scale than we ever did 10 years ago. And I've been very fortunate to kind of have a front seat working with a lot of the most well-known names in the tech world, really. Very fortunate.
I love it. It's really funny because there are many things that you mentioned that I experienced the same thing. Well, I haven't worked with such big names, but I've seen the same evolution within the startup ecosystem over the past few years, and it's very exciting. But I completely get, the moment where you wanted to switch on the other side, and all this progression. I really love that. I actually have a question that lots of founders ask me. So over the past years, I've been working mainly with very early stage startups, but also very technical founders. And quite often when I joined the team, they had no online presence, no idea what to do in terms of communication marketing. So my first question is, when do you feel it's super important to start having a presence? Should we start early days, like very day one, thinking about that? Well, you mentioned that you started seeing some CMOs being part of the founding team, so I guess they might bring this vibe, but for founders that are not from this perspective and that are more technical, should they start from day one or should they wait until they're ready to reach a certain stage?
So you should absolutely start from day one, but you don't have to start by shouting from the rooftops about everything that you're creating, right? Like you're going to be building a product that you might want to keep quite hush-hush. You're going to want to phase the way in which you launch it to market. But what you should absolutely do from the beginning is start to build general awareness and material amongst all of your profiles that's going to complement all of your future activity. So, if you set up a company and you're pretty set on the name that you have from the beginning, go and get all of your social media channels, at least own them. I see it a lot where people kind of panic and then have to get, the right Twitter handle or the right Instagram handle dependent on their business. And there's simple things that you need to take in consideration. Like if you're going to use social media, it is best to make sure that all of your social media handles are the same. So the only way that you're going to make sure that you get that is if you just set them up. Doesn't matter if they're just set to private and there's no activity, just get ownership of them. The other thing to think about is what you do with your personal profile. So when you're starting the business, you're going to be working on figuring out who your customers are, what the product is that you're building. You're going to go through all of that development, but you're also going to start thinking about how you might raise finance, right? So you need to consider how you build your own profile as a founder. So that's even as simple as just making sure that, your LinkedIn profile is really slick. It's really up to date. Tighten everything up, position yourself in the right way, provide a little bit of information about what your company is up to, and then start actually sharing things yourself. So if I could get every founder that I've worked with at an early stage to go back 12, 18 months and actually use Twitter or use LinkedIn, it would make a huge difference when we start working with them. Because when we go to the media, for instance, right, and we're pitching someone for an interview or we're going to pitch the company for a particular story, what's the first thing that most people are going to do if they're potentially interested in covering you? They're going to Google you. Right? So if you don't look like you've been sharing much in the way of expertise on your Twitter or on your LinkedIn, and I'm not saying you have to do it all of the time, by the way, but just something every week would be very good. If you're not sharing that much or positioning yourself as an expert or a leader in the field of what you're doing, it's going to potentially put journalists off of you. But the other side is if you do all of that at the same time that you're also going out and you're maybe talking to investors, that could be a really good indication. And again, they're going to go and look at what your social presence is like. And it's just small things like that if you can do a little bit week by week by week, it'll really, really help in the future. So when you're thinking about marketing, you don't have to have a great big massive marketing strategy when you first begin, but you should absolutely take ownership of the owned channels that you have before you and start using them in a really smart way. So owned channels, it's just anywhere that you can self-publish. You don't have to pay for it and you don't have to earn it, which is where PR sits.
That's actually what I did the day my co-founder and I chose the name of our company. I told him, okay, are we sure that's what we go for? And then I registered the website and the Twitter, because the Twitter handle, I'm a big Twitter addict, and Twitter for me was like, no way, we're not going to have the Twitter handle we want. So
yeah,
yes.
it's worth doing. The number of times you come across a company that they can't get the specific brand name as the Twitter handle, so maybe they add a join or a team or a something in order to make it work. In the long term, that could become a real problem. It's fine for a little short term bit, but eventually you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to try and find a way to buy the Twitter handle that you really want just to keep your brand really slick, or you're going to have to change your name.
Yeah. What I find a bit frustrating sometimes is when I'm looking for a company I came across and I want to find, all of their social media, whether it's social media or website, and I Google the name and I just can't find anything because it's such a generic name and there is nothing that just comes up because it's just a common name. And you're like, what should I put on Google to find them really? It's a bit frustrating for that.
That's a problem. It's the finding people, right? So being able to discover a brand easily is so important. And one of the simple things that, again, people just forget at the beginning, and this can also happen if you just, your brain is not geared in that way. It's even just a really simple thing, like, you set up a very simple web page, just kind of as a holding section for what's to come. Make sure your Twitter is on it, your Instagram is on it, all of the various places that your company has a profile, just make sure the icons are there with working hyperlinks. That's the other mistake I've seen numerous times, where the icon is there, but the hyperlink doesn't exist. Get it set up, because there will be people that, like me, like journalists, that do need to find it. And sometimes just going via your website is going to be much faster than going via Google.
Yes. Talking about journalists and PR, so content creation is a big part of of lots of blog posts and articles about how you really get started in terms of starting communicating to the world about your company. And I have a question here from Luke. How do you get articles in business magazine and websites? And I think it also raises a question. How do you just get noticed out there in the crowd? How do you stand out from the crowd? Do you have any tips on that?
I think I could end up talking about this for 20 minutes.
Okay.
So there are a few different stages to making sure that you get coverage and that you can place or be put into articles in publications. I think the first thing to remember is just the way in which media works, because that's really important to understand. So with media, like I've already said, it is an earned channel. There will be publications out there that, I kind of say them loosely, they're publications. They will charge you for coverage. That's not journalism. That's, paid editorial, advertorial. In order for you to get coverage, you need to accept that every time you're talking to a journalist, you're selling a story to them. Now, every publication, the way in which they typically make money is based on advertising. Advertising revenue is based on the number of people that come through to their website. So it's based on the number of eyes that are going to see a particular story, which means the most critical thing is relevancy when you're pitching a story to a particular publication and a journalist at that publication. But also you've got to think about how exciting or how engaging this story is going to be. We're increasingly seeing more publications, even very sophisticated ones, are starting to shift to having headlines that are incredibly clickbaity. And they've been designed in such a way that they are trying to get as many people as possible to come through and read that article. Now, with clickbait headlines, they don't actually necessarily line up with the article that then flows from them. So they sometimes, with some publications, can be very misleading. So they can suggest something else, and then if you read the story, the headline just is completely wrong. They've taken something shocking and twisted it. But you need to keep all of these things in mind when you're pitching journalists, because they ultimately need to buy a story from you without money, right? Buy a story from you that is going to make sure that they have lots of readers and that they're going to engage on a particular page and stay on their website, and they're going to make revenue from that. The other thing to keep in mind is a journalist's time. So dependent on the publication, whether it's digital, whether it's print, whether it's something like the Daily Mail, or whether it's something like TechCrunch, journalists can only write so many articles in a day. So they've got to make sure that every article that they write is going to be read by lots of people, and it informs. And then secondly, they've got to think about the stories that they've maybe been working on for a few weeks, the stories that are going to come in that day, and they've got to think about the stories that were maybe pitched in the last few days. And then they've got to make a decision as themselves as a journalist, and then for their editor, as to which stories they're going to continue working on and they're going to get live that day. So they're incredibly restricted when it comes to time. So you have to sell someone who is incredibly time poor, incredibly stressed, and at the end of the day, their measurement of success is how many readers, or they'll have other personal levels of success, but internally it's how many readers, how much does this bring, the traffic does this bring to us, and how much revenue. Now, think about your inbox, your email inbox. So the majority of journalists, if you're going to pitch them, you should only pitch them on email or Twitter, unless they really state otherwise. Some publications are still a little bit old school and they will pick up the phone. At the moment, you can completely remove the phone from the equation because everyone is working from home and no one really gives their mobile numbers out anymore. So you're going to have to pitch them on email or Twitter. Do not touch LinkedIn, do not touch Facebook, and I will explain why maybe in a little bit later, but just don't do it. For some, they may also provide access to WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram. All of this stuff you can find out by looking on their Twitters typically. Now, you have to get the attention of them while they're looking through an inbox where everyone else is trying to get their attention. And I don't know if you're like me, but I've got two inboxes. I have my work inbox where I try and get it down to 0 as much as I possibly can. Mm-hmm. Then I have a personal email that I do not touch with a barge pole unless there is a specific email that comes through on it that I know I need to open. And that comes down to judging the subject line. So your first in with a journalist typically is the subject line of your email, for them to then open it up and then read through that in order to then consider if it's something that's relevant for them, in order to then maybe look at getting an article live. So your subject line is really important, and you need to think about your subject line almost as if it's a bit clickbaity itself. Now, if you're a startup that's never done PR before, or you're just generally not known, then putting the name of your company in the subject line, it means nothing. It's wasted space. Don't do it. Think about selling your story in such a way that you don't have to use your brand name, and you can keep it short and you can get their attention. As an example of this, a former colleague of mine when I was when I was at another agency, he's now the enterprise editor at the Times, a guy called James Hurley. He's lovely. James mentioned to me when I started working with him at Albion that when he left the Daily Telegraph before joining us, he had 60,000 unread emails in his inbox.
Wow.
So these guys are getting hundreds of pitches per day. They're not going to open up every single one, and they're not going to read the full email. So you've got to push them to open you by making a really compelling subject line. And then the email itself, you've got to get to the point. The way that press releases typically work, and this is really helpful for keeping in mind when you pitch a journalist, is you need to cover the offer that you're making, but then also the key information in basically the first 2 paragraphs. If you find yourself writing lots and lots of text, bullet points, great, use bullet points. You need to cover who, what, where, when, why, and how, aka 5 W's and an H. Succinctly cover that information, and you need to make it as easy as possible for them to make a decision about it, and then also to write a story or to write an article. If you are, for instance, going to pitch an opinion piece or a thought leadership article, then provide, again, a headline that's really compelling, provide a synopsis of what it is that you would like to provide them with, and provide a little bit of information about your company, and then your biography, because they need to see you as an expert, and they need to know that also when this goes live, you're going to be able to share it in various places yourself. The key thing to go way back is, in order for you to get an article live, or for a journalist to be interested in you, the best thing you can do is research. So you need to read the publication, you need to understand what that journalist covers, and you need to pitch them something that is bespoke. It's for them, and it's because you've done all of that research before. If you come up with something that you think is really interesting, and then you think, oh, there's 20 different publications out there that will take this, there won't be. There'll maybe be 1 or 2. So you need to reconfigure how you're going to approach them and create stories that are for them, rather than a story you think is really great and then trying to make it work for them. It's the whole, square peg, round hole, or round, that way round. It's you have to create things publication by publication, really, in order for it to work.
That's a lot to think about when you're
sorry.
No, that's amazing. I mean, I love all your tips, and I find this really super amazing. I've worked a lot with agencies when it comes to PR. I've never really done much PR myself, and I love all those tips to take in consideration, because I feel that journalist is a bit like VCs. When you are an early stage company, everyone wants to talk to them, and it's really hard just to get into their mailbox and get them to answer to you, and they are just such in demand. Everyone is just jumping on them and trying to grab them. So yeah. I'm wondering, for early stage companies, I guess, well, with everything you just said, it makes more sense for them to bring someone on board to help them on that. When it comes to helping early stage companies, do you think that there is a point where it makes sense to have like a marketing person or PR person coming within the team, being in the house? Is it a matter of stage, or is it a matter of like having a mix of agency support and in-house support, and it doesn't really matter if it's in-house or not?
So I think it's best to try it all at some point, and you probably will, because there are a lot of businesses out there that started by using agencies, and then as they scale, when they're at a point where they have the money to effectively build an in-house team that just rolls out that function, they're typically fine. At that point, they'll then maybe bring on an agency if there is a very specific requirement. So say a particular campaign that they want to run, or there's a particular launch that's going to happen. So for a lot of companies, if I think of, say, TransferWise, for instance, right? So TransferWise, I worked with them at 2 different agencies. So I worked with them when they were launching. So this is back when they'd had their first round of investment from Index Ventures, and trying to explain peer-to-peer money transfer was really difficult because it was a new concept. So a lot of the work that we had to do then was using press contacts that we already had. So the agency is already in a stronger position than the client because we have pre-existing relationships and we know how to pitch to them. And they'll hear us out. Whereas if it's the client going in, you're a new name, you're a new brand, it's very difficult to get their attention. So at the early stages, working with someone can be really helpful just because they can open up doors. They'll also tell you if you're opening or pushing the wrong doors, because there might be that you think there's a particular publication that you need to be in, and they'll look at you and go, why? Your audience isn't there. And that's really helpful as well for understanding how it all breaks up. So TransferWise started with like a flurry of activity with a funding announcement, and then activity disappears. That's quite common. So there's like we do this a lot at CEW. We support funding announcements with a fixed package for it. So we'll do a couple of weeks of work. There'll be a boom, we raise money and we're covered in X, Y, Z, and then everything goes dead because other channels need to be utilized. PR, unless you have more money and more budget to keep it going, PR requires a huge amount of work to grow momentum and keep those doors open and find new ways to get stories out there. And that's where agencies can be helpful because they can be creative and they can bring ideas to the table. If they're not doing that, they're not good agencies. So they can do that, but you probably don't typically need to do that. You can use an agency to support a funding announcement, or you can go it alone. And the go it alone is an option. And I actually, for some companies where budget is an issue, I really push them to do this because I think it allows you to have much more awareness of how the media works. You do get a chance to build your own relationships, and it will teach you a little bit more about storytelling, which can be so beneficial in the long run. So TransferWise used us, then nothing. And then they brought someone in-house. So they had one person in-house who was managing PR. And this was a former journalist. They came in-house, and then what they were doing is they were kind of overseeing PR in the UK, but TransferWise then needed to expand into new markets and into specifically new currencies. So they would then work alongside an agency. So the in-house person basically manages the agency, and the agency provides the manpower for actually getting all of this activity out there, because it is a lot. It can be a lot for one person to do. And then TransferWise, as they've continued to grow and continue to scale, they do everything in-house now. Every campaign that you see TransferWise run is an in-house team. It's the same with Deliveroo. Deliveroo has an incredibly strong internal consumer PR team. And that's because with the Series B, Series C, later stage investment, they're able to build something that scales, because that's going to be much more cost effective than having 10 agencies in 10 markets. But so agencies then become something that you use as and when, rather than continuously. However, if you are someone like Microsoft, then you have all of your internal communications people who oversee PR. You'll probably have, like a global head and then individual market heads, and then you still have PR agencies. And the difference with that is Microsoft has a huge amount of product. So there is a continual need in order to actually engage with press. And again, because Microsoft, huge company, huge name, it's like talking about Apple, people are going to come to them for stories. The way that this works is it flips. you get to a certain point in your journey through comms and as your business scales, that rather than you continuously going to journalists start coming to you because you're of a particular scale, you're in a particular market, you're going to be really insightful, or they're just following you. You know, we follow Deliveroo a huge amount. We're following Deliveroo a huge amount right now because they're impacted by COVID-19. And we'd all like to continue to get hamburgers, but, you know, they're laying off some stuff. And they're at risk unless they get this Amazon investment. Sorry, I've just gone off on a tangent. But, you know, we start following the businesses that are doing phenomenally well. So there is a tipping point. In some cases, you can use an agency the whole way through. Some cases, you might not touch an agency. It really, really does depend on what it is that you're trying to achieve and when you're trying to achieve it. Just as an example, in last week, I've spoken with numerous businesses who are right now urgently looking at bringing on a PR agency because they've got stories that need to go out in the next 2 to 3 weeks and they're COVID-19 related. And the reason they know they need a PR agency is because they need scale. Yeah. They need the expertise. They need someone who can open up those doors. So when you're thinking about PR, it's best probably just to ask yourself a few questions. You know, like, how important is this particular announcement, if you have an announcement? Or, you know, how important is a particular audience segment? And is PR a channel that could potentially open and increase that awareness? How time poor am I is a big one. If you don't have time to do it yourself, then obviously getting help is the best way to do it. And then how much budget do I have to put towards it? Because budget and time will also, you know, be the deciding factor on whether you use an agency or whether you maybe look at also getting a freelancer, which is also another option.
I actually have a question from Eddie who asked about personal branding and if it would make sense to use an agency or maybe a freelancer to help someone on their personal branding to go out there.
So personal branding, my opinion on that is it's something you need to work on individually. I think you can get guidance from a person, maybe a freelancer. But so personal branding for me, whenever I have a personal brand. My personal brand is I help as much as I possibly can. I genuinely do. I've always believed in giving more than you take. So that's a big thing that I still try to champion now, even with the company. And I also am very open about my mental health because it's a personal thing for me that I believe everyone should be able to talk about mental health as easily as they talk about having a back pain. So I all of these things, I make sure that I do them across every channel that I'm on. And some channels more than others, because there's some where you just naturally feel more comfortable. So like you, Amandine, I'm much more comfortable with Twitter. And then following Twitter, it's probably Instagram. Instagram is a bit more of a personal channel. Twitter, I have a balance of my personal stuff plus my work stuff. LinkedIn's just business. And Facebook is just where my mum likes my posts. So I don't really tend to do a huge amount of stuff on Facebook anymore. But it's I think that the place to start from with personal branding is, what are your values? So think about what your personal values are, and then think about how you portray those values publicly. For me, my personal branding has always been more about my actions and less about my how I look. So I'm not so slick on design or anything like that. I should probably at some point get someone to help me with that, but it's just not my style. It makes me feel a bit cringe. If you are a bit like me and you easily cringe at that stuff, then I think that's where someone can be really helpful, because they'll push you to do things that you didn't think. So interestingly enough, a few times this week, I've had conversations with other marketing people, giving them some mentoring, and they already know a huge amount of the answers of the things that they need to do. But it's having that external voice say, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. It just reaffirms stuff they were already thinking, but it also pushes them to actually act on it. So if you have the budget, look at bringing someone on who can be that person for you. But I wouldn't sink huge amounts of money into developing your personal brand when really it really needs to come from you. The only thing you need to consider when you're developing it is if your personal brand is also something that you're developing alongside a business, then you need to balance what your personal values are with the values of the business. And quite frankly, if you're a founder of a small company, the two are pretty much just going to be the same. There might be one or two things that you say on the business side that you don't say on the personal side, but you'll still champion them. You need to figure out how the two work together. And then it's a case of actually when you're using your channels, it's just keeping it balanced. So if you're trying to use your personal brand to grow the business, then you need to make sure that you're sharing some business related content, but you also need to do stuff which is just you, because people follow people, we don't follow businesses.
Yeah. That's a big rule that people need to remember sometimes. Yes, it's all about the people at the end. So we talk about the individual, the startup, but we also started mentioning some marketing for bigger companies and corporations. I'm wondering, there are so many articles online about marketing and your strategy. Do you see lots of misconception or things that just apply to startup, or something that should be like is presented as being a usual rule for marketing, but actually it doesn't apply to startup, and startups should be more careful about?
Yeah, I guess that the big thing with marketing is huge.
Yes.
Marketing is incredibly broad. And the lines of marketing blurred with business development and blurred with sales, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you're reading articles about how the big guys are doing it, definitely take lessons from them. But the misconception is you cannot do all of it. It's impossible. If you're a small company, you cannot manage every single marketing channel. You also don't need to, because there will be channels that work for you and there will be channels that don't work for you. So the big thing to keep in mind is when you're starting, figure out the channels where your clients are and just focus on those channels. With marketing, sometimes people can get kind of carried away with a much bigger creative concept. And creativity is so important, but at the end of the day, you've got to drive results. So try and keep any creative campaigns that you come up with grounded, and that they're actually going to address the channels that you need to be speaking on. So the easiest way to figure out where your audience is it's to ask them. This is one that gets forgotten. So we can sometimes get so hung up in asking potential customers about product and solving their problems, which is incredibly important, obviously, but it doesn't take more than 30 or 60 seconds to add two more questions when you're talking to them. And those questions can be, what are your media habits? What social media do you use? How often do you check it? What publications do you like to read? Do you go to events? What other brands do you really like? You can ask an array of different questions. You pick the ones that are going to make the most sense to you. But through that, you'll get an indication of where they spend their time, who they follow, what publications that they get their news from. And all of this is really important because it will help you figure out how to tell stories that are going to work for them. You'll get that from the problems that they have. The problem that solve is always going to be greater than the solution that you have, and you need to use various different channels, particularly in PR. But you'll also then be able to create a marketing strategy that goes after the channels that are of importance, and then that's when you need to think, obviously, like a lean startup. So you need to be agile. You need to be willing to try all of these channels for a while, but recognize when things aren't working and change it. There'll be a point where you go, that channel just does not work for us. No more energy goes into it. Fine, remove it, double down on something else. But you only get that from testing and learning. It's the same as with your product. You have to test and learn every single marketing channel that you believe is going to work for you based on your customers. And that will change over time. And there will always be new things that come up from the marketing perspective that might be worth experimenting with. So a simple strategy would just be to think about how you use your own channels, which are critical, obviously, at all points, because your website is the first thing anyone will see if they come through to look at you. You need to think about your social content. How you use different social channels changes from channel to channel. You need to think about the content that you can put elsewhere. So, potentially if you're writing stuff that goes on your blog, you may also publish it on LinkedIn. You might want to think about PR. You might want to think about how you engage your community. So your community is a marketing channel. It's how you engage them that's important. So you can build that through newsletters, that's social media, but you'll have people that become advocates for you. It's how you nurture your key customers. Then you want to think about events. Now, events for right now, they're all going to be virtual, right? But there's still a strategy that's involved in that. And then, thinking maybe about partners, so other businesses that you collaborate with, whether you then go down the route of affiliate marketing, anything. If you do a general Google search, Google classic always brings up some really good images of kind of marketing channels. So it will show you a huge array of different options that you have. Sometimes it's a good exercise just to have one of those in front of you, and circle up to maybe 8 or 10, the most important ones that you think that you can manage. And when I say 8 or 10, I mean like you're including Twitter, LinkedIn as separate channels, not as one, as social media. So have a play around with that and then consolidate it down. But I think this is the problem with big companies, is they can do lots and lots of stuff really, really, really well. And then at a startup level, you're kind of like, oh, okay, we have to do all of this. You can't. You have to focus, test, and learn.
Completely agree. And I think several people on the chat, especially Eddie and Luke, said that everything you just said and even before is super insightful, and they are taking notes and clearly marking the video so they can watch it again afterward, because that's so many tips and that's so much you can just integrate and just take note of. But that's fantastic. I also want you to I want to ask you about the current situation. So it's not the usual situation where you can plan your marketing. So you mentioned that you've been talking to startups that are right now looking at they're either in the middle of their marketing campaign or they are launching something soon. So what are the worries of those startups, and what do you advise them regarding the current lockdown and situation?
So the biggest problem for a lot of companies right now, if I remove the ones that I have spoken to, because they have they're basically working on solutions that could help people with coronavirus or whilst we're in lockdown. So it's much more kind of medical health focused. But for every other business that can't necessarily provide a coronavirus solution, the biggest problem is obviously, at the end of the day, you still want to make money. You need to make money in order to survive. But right now, we're in an environment where if you push sales, people are going to attack you very quickly. If you do not treat your customers well, it will be remembered. That's kind of the threat that a lot of people are using right now. But that means on the flip side that if you treat your customers really well and you treat them like human beings and you are vulnerable yourself, then you're going to be remembered. People are going to want to help you. If I think that it's removed from tech, but my dad and my mother are the reasons that I have an obsession with gin. I won't show it to you, but my collection in the corner is quite substantial. It's helpful in lockdown. But with this obsession, they have discovered lots of independent distilleries all across the UK and quite a few in Scotland where they're completely in love with everything. And the distillers, the independent ones, have been hit quite bad because most of their sales are done online. They're shipped directly to people at home. And a lot of the sales actually come through tourism as people are going through the Scottish Islands and everything. And my dad, there's a couple of distilleries that he just adores. Like he'll just continuously buy gin from them. But one of them is a company called Barra Gin. And they have an amazing gin. And usually it retails at £40 for a bottle. And then on top of that, they ship it to you. But Barra, like a lot of others right now, the problem is that they can't sell it. And they're highly at risk of the business falling apart. So what they've done is they've lowered the price of the gin to 30 quid a bottle, including post and packaging.
Okay.
So I'm using this as an example because it's an example. Sorry, I'm stuttering. It's an example of a business that has realized, right, we're in a problematic situation. we cannot expect people to part 40 quid for a bottle of gin when everyone at the most is really just rushing to Asda, Waitrose, Costco, whatever. But we could lower our price and we can make it more compelling for people to support us. Because at the end of the day, we're saying we need help. We're vulnerable. We have stock and we're willing to bring the price down and ship it to you for cheaper, which is also helpful for customers, right? Because it's a little bit cheaper and it's a nice treat. I bring this up because my dad told me about it and I've then immediately gone and bought a bottle of Barra gin. Unfortunately, it's not coming to Spain. It's going to Wiltshire so I can surprise my future parents-in-law and be in good favour. But they're an example, like so many other companies right now, that are thinking about how they just change their offering and then how they market it back to customers. Everyone right now should be really lowering prices. We've had a really good 10, 12-year run, but we need to be realistic right now. And what's more important right now is building credibility with your customers for when the restart happens. So the big thing, I think, is you have to accept that there is no more normal. We're not going back to normality. We are going to restart. When lockdowns do start to phase out and end, there will be a restart, and it's going to look very different to how things looked before lockdown. So think about what you can provide customers right now that is of value to them. It's not value to you, value to them. So a big thing that I've seen from brands that I think are doing it really well is showing vulnerability. Every company, every person is vulnerable right now. And I think any business that talks to their customers and doesn't address the big corona-shaped elephant in the room, they're letting themselves down and they're letting their customers down. I mean, I've already been pissed off by 2 or 3 different companies that I use for services, and they're huge, right? So Vodafone went ahead and continued with increasing its prices by 2.5% in line with inflation. And you kind of read that email and you're like, Vodafone, nothing is inflating right now. That's ridiculous. And it really infuriates you. And I've been a Vodafone customer for 5-6 years. I don't want to use Vodafone anymore. The minute I can find someone else and change, I will change. They piss me off. Why would I not go and use someone else?
Definitely.
Yeah, and likewise, Amex. I have an American Express card, and they went ahead with the monthly renewal fee this month. And you're like, oh, come on, Amex, why can't you just delay it by 3 months or something? It'd be really helpful. So there's lots of things that people can do that are going to be helpful to their customers. So I live in Barcelona. My business is based in London. I usually flick between the two weekly, which means that I'm an EasyJet Plus customer. EasyJet obviously massively impacted, like every airline. What they're doing is I can cancel flights that I already had and I can get a voucher, which is fine for me because I'm a frequent flyer. Or if I really want the money back, I'll have to phone them, and I don't really want to do that. But the option is there. But I also had an email from them last night to say, as an EasyJet Plus customer, we realize you can't fly right now, so we're going to extend your membership by 3 months.
Oh, that's nice.
Great. Yeah, really nice. Like, oh, cool. Okay, that saves me money, and also it means I make the most out of my card. So I think the key things in this environment are to remember tone. You can't sell like you used to. You need to remove the idea of sales KPIs for the next couple of months. Like anything that you had predetermined, change it. It doesn't make sense anymore. Your KPI right now should be engagement. It should be how many people you can reach, how many people you can help, how much your audience can grow. And what you should be thinking about is what you do when you restart. So prepare stuff now for when lockdowns do start to end, people start returning, and it will be a different environment. It cannot be the same, but you can start thinking about what you can do now so that when that happens, you can just press go and you're not playing catch up.
You mentioned that you see some changes that will happen when the economy will restart and when life will resume. So what can people do if they are preparing for a campaign or something to start after the lockdown? What can they do to actually take in consideration those changes? Do you have any prediction? Do you think that it's just going to be more connected and online and people's expectation will be slightly different? Or do you think there will be something radically different?
So what I think across multiple different sectors, the workforce is going to shrink.
Mm-hmm.
I think, everyone's kind of gearing up for this to bring along a recession.
Yeah.
That's going to make things much more competitive and difficult. But again, it depends on what market you're in. So, some markets are probably going to do much better than others as a result of this. So, for instance, bloody hell, if you run a video conferencing business right now, you're probably doing pretty well. I think we'll see people's habits change. So my partner and I are kind of working on a prediction of two things at the moment, and I think it's going to depend on the sort of people or sort of person someone is. When the restart happens, there's going to be people that are, sorry for using this word, guys, stupid. There's going to be the people that want to rush back and do everything because we've not been able to do everything for so long. So they're going to want to just be outside and see everyone and touch everyone. And that might have an immediate kind of uplift for the economy if people are suddenly like, yay, restaurants, yay, outdoors, pubs. But there's also going to be a bracket of people that aren't that person, because there will be people that are still concerned, right? Because it's highly likely that we'll probably have a second wave of this. We may even have a third wave of this. So you have to take into consideration that there's going to be different brackets of people and habits. But if you focus on the people that are maybe being a bit more cautious, then you've got people that for a very long time have never probably worked from home that now know how to work from home. They're much more digital. You can't reach them face to face anymore, but you can sell to them across digital channels a lot more because everyone's just online even more than they were before. And the thing to think about is messaging when you come back into the restart. So at least with messaging, the knock-on effects of COVID-19 and everyone going back to work and all of these things starting to shift again, their messaging is still going to be really important because you're still going to have to be sensitive in some form. And as people and as brands, I think we still have to be willing to be vulnerable, because if you pretend you're not, that just, a personal thing, I just think you come across as a dick. Everyone is having a tough time right now, and there's different levels of how tough that is, but there's going to be knock-on effects for months to come as a result of this. So I think that the biggest thing to remember is to just be human. Think about if you were reading something and you've been sat at home for 6 weeks and you lost your parents or something, think about different people out there right now and what they're going to be reading. So, kind of step away from the material that you create and get other people to read it. That's the biggest thing. If you've got time to prepare, you've got time for people to review.
Yes. And I think what you're mentioning also is something I've been preaching for quite some time, is also transparency. As we talked before, there are humans behind the companies and companies of any sizes. So you have to stay human behind the brand, and to show that, well, there are humans behind. It's not just the brand talking to people, it's also other people talking to other people.
Yeah,
I think that's I really look forward for that. I mean, I try to stay positive and to believe in entrepreneurship and believe that there will be lots of changes, but also lots of new innovation, lots of companies that will be more lean and more thoughtful about what they're doing. But for sure, there are lots of things that are not being done right now, and people need to be careful about how they're talking to their customers.
Yeah. I think, when we do go into restart, there is still going to be a huge amount of opportunity there. Yeah. Like you say, that, it's a real time for innovation that, is not just someone bringing me my food to my door. We hope that there will be a lot more innovation that can really impact people's lives. And also, I think, for certain industries that have been more traditional still, this could bring on a whole new wave of digital transformation. which they're going to have to, because I think everyone, when we do go back, the other thing to consider is it's contingency planning. You know,
Yes.
with coronavirus still being out there, it's highly likely at some point that someone you know will get it. So how do you make sure that other things can still keep going in a world where we're still fighting this virus?
Definitely, yes. So it's been almost an hour since we've been chatting. Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure to add, or a question you wanted me to ask you on the topic?
So one point I would make. So if you are going to contact journalists, the best place to build relationships with them, or actually just to know a lot more about them and how to work with them, is Twitter.
Okay. Yes, join us on Twitter.
Yeah, come join Twitter. Every article, well, for most of them, every article that they write, they will share it themselves on Twitter. There's a lot of talking between journalists about various things that are happening and stories. So it's a really good place to actually kind of add your 2 cents. Mm-hmm. So if you follow particular journalists and they're writing stories that are relevant to you in some forms, whether it's just connected in the market or it's more product related, talk to them, like provide insight, give them comments. And for God's sake, make sure your Twitter bio is up to date, just so they know who you are and it's all relevant. But it's a really good place to build relationships with them. And when I started in PR almost 10 years ago, that was where I built a huge amount of my connections. But try as much as you can to be a very slick digital stalker. I have a random knack for being able to remember which journalists have cats and which journalists have dogs. Just from following them and engaging with them, because I'm slightly obsessed with puppies. Mm-hmm. It's simple things like that. And you can engage with them both on a professional level with comments on what they're writing about, and actually just, talk like a human. That's the way in which I've built up pretty much all of my journalist contacts, is not because I just pitch. Yeah. I've always followed a rule, which is kind of 80-20, 90-10, dependent on the situation, where if I'm talking to a journalist, whether it's kind of online or in person, if I'm buying them a drink or something, or meet them at an event, I'll just talk and try and help them with stories. I'll think of people that they should be talking to. And 80% of the stuff that I'll talk to them about will not be anything to do with any of my clients.
But that's how you build a relationship, right?
Exactly. It is. And it's the same with building a relationship with your customers, right? If you use your social channels and all you do is tweet about how amazing you are and sell your product, no one's going to follow you. Yeah. You have to provide content that is going to be useful and insightful, and it's engaging, it's uplifting. In some cases, it's funny. And then the other remaining 20-30% of the time, you more actively engage them with content that's about you in some form. So whether that's the product, it's a sale, it's we're hiring, you make it more company centric, and the rest is related to you and share, touches on the problems that they have and who they are, but it's not an active sale.
Is there any resources that you'd recommend people to check out if they're interested in the topic? I know it's more something that you may be observing and following companies in your space, what they're doing, and thinking about your own company. But still, is there any, I don't know, book, Bible that people should read about branding, maybe, or something that you really enjoyed and you would like to shout out about?
So I'm planning on writing a book, so I'll self-promote one for the future. So the ones that I would suggest, so if you go to our website, so CEWComms.com, and actually it's better if you search it on Google, it's something I need to fix. We wrote an article a while ago which is called 5 PR and Communications Books You Should Read. Okay. That's a good one to have a look at. Also on our blog, sorry for the self-plug, but we have got a huge amount of content that we've created, which is to help early stage startups before they need us. So we've got an article, for example, that actually shows you how to write a press release, but it's written in the style of a press release. We've got various links to pieces that kind of support you thinking about your social media and how you think about content as well. But other places I would look at online is if you're following journalists, the big thing of how you can always get better is to read what they write. Simple thing, just keep reading. And I would also have a look at, oh God, it's escaped me now. There's a Twitter channel, I think it's called Marketing Examples, which looks at different things people are doing and then kind of gives their breakdown of why they think it's good, why they don't think it's good, which is really useful right now. They've been sharing a lot of material that's obviously come out whilst we're in COVID-19 lockdown. And that's a really good place to get an idea for what works well and what does not work. Sifted, by the way, have written numerous articles that are related to comms, and they did one a couple of weeks back. I think it was just pre-lockdown, which was about stunt PR, and it's really good. So also have a look at startup publications in general, because they'll normally cover some pieces to do with PR or very specific areas of it.
Fantastic. I took some notes. I'll try to add some of those in the description of the video on YouTube later on. But that's so many amazing resources, but also amazing tips that you just shared today. So huge thanks, Cathy. I don't want to take too much of your time. It has been such a pleasure. I mean, we've known each other for quite some time, and I'm so glad to eventually have you on the stream. So that's a great opportunity. And yeah, huge thanks to you. Just one last question. I know that you mentioned being super open about your mental health on social media, and I think that's fantastic. Do you have any tips for anyone right now struggling? I know I am enjoying a lot, well, not the current situation, but the lockdown. I don't mind it at all, because I'm used to work remotely, and it actually gives me an opportunity to feel no pressure to go out to events and just focus on what I'm working on. Do you have any tips for people who actually are struggling right now?
Well, I think that the big thing is be honest about struggling. So what I've found ever since I made the decision to just talk openly about my mental health is the more I say how I'm feeling or what I'm going through, the more I have people talk back to me, and put their hand up and go, yeah, same here. Or yeah, I felt like that 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And I find that really helpful, because then you talk, you share. And I've had so many people just from saying on Twitter, simple things like, oh, I've been depressed for the last 6 weeks, or something, that someone won't necessarily publicly, but they'll privately message me and say, thank you so much for sharing that. And then I get a whole story. This is what's going on here. Any advice that you have? People are really, really kind when you share it. There's people that will respond and they will be very helpful. And there's people that will just tell you that you've helped them, actually. Because I think everyone needs to be reminded that you're not alone. You're not alone in feeling like this. And things I'm doing at the moment, I only just downloaded it. I'm using Calm this week to give it a go. So I'm trying to do a daily meditation, and I'm trying not to be cynical and roll my eyes, but I am trying for like 10 minutes every day, and even just to track my mood. And I also started, I haven't done it today yet. I will probably do it later and mention you, Amandine. But I started doing a daily gratitude list. So it doesn't matter how many things you write down. I try and write down 5 usually, but 5 things I'm grateful for every single day. And it doesn't matter how big or how small, it's just the things that day that, made a difference, whether it's something that happened the night before, whether it's something that happened in the morning. But remembering the good things, the little things that make you happy or feel lucky or feel content right now, that's really important as well. So I think that's a good practice to do, even if it's just in your head. I put it on Twitter because I like having some form of accountability. Like I have to go and I have to do my gratitude list. And I have to put it out there. And I also am doing that because I think it's important that other people recognize that for some of us, we are actually very lucky. Like I'm in Spain, we can't go outside and exercise, which sucks. And I'm really upset about that. But I have a balcony, and a lot of people here don't have a balcony. So it's things like that you need to kind of keep the perspective right now.
Well, thank you very much, Cathy. I think that's super useful, and I ask you because I've seen those gratitude posts, and I think it could be super useful for people struggling. And I love the idea. I find it super cute, and I really respect how you just open up because there are lots of people who want to and don't do it on social media, and just seeing other people just talking about it is super useful. So huge thanks, Cathy, for your time. Have a lovely weekend.
Oh,
Yes.
I have one little plug, if I'm allowed.
Sure.
So one of the things that I'm doing as part of my, well, kind of personal brand, I guess. When lockdown started here, I launched a virtual coffee half hour.
Yes.
So anyone can grab a virtual coffee with me and have a chat or just ask me questions, just use my brain on anything that you think will be useful right now. If you go onto my Twitter profile, which is at Cathy White 1010, it's a pinned tweet up at the top. So if anyone would like to book a half-hour coffee chat over Google Hangouts, then it's available for them.
Amazing. I love how much you make yourself available right now for that. That's amazing. Huge thanks, Cathy. I wish you a fantastic weekend. I'm going to stay for a few minutes on the stream just to debrief a bit. I've seen lots of comments on the chat about personal situation and everything, so I'll stay on the stream for a couple of minutes. But thank you, Cathy. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll chat really soon.
Yeah, you too, love. Take care. Thanks for having me.